5 years ago, I thought I had married the woman I would grow old with. Her name was Helen. She had bright eyes, a quick mind, and that fiery character they talk about. Back then, I found it appealing. Her outbursts, those were about passion, about vibrant energy, about the fact that life with me would never be boring. Well, she wasn't lying. Boring, for sure, it wasn't that I'm Eric. Helen and I lived in South Carolina, in a small town where everyone knows each other. I worked with my hands, woodworking, restoration, repairs. I'd been involved in this field since my youth, dreaming of starting something of my own. A couple of years after our wedding, we managed to save up enough for a workshop. It was a small shop, but full of heart. She handled the business side, the accounting, and I did everything else. We worked 10 to 12 hours a day, no days off. This was our business. Or, at least, that's what I thought that I in those early years. I hardly ever thought about money. The main thing was to survive, to grow. There were no expensive gifts, no vacations, no dinners at trendy restaurants. I saved on literally everything, even on myself. I bought a used car, shopped for clothes at sales. Helen didn't complain. Not at first, at least, but by the 3rd year, I started noticing how her attitude was changing. That at first, it was innocent jabs. "Are you really wearing that old shirt again?" Then, it turned into open dissatisfaction. "How long are we going to live like monks? Was this really why I worked side by side with you?" I tried to explain. We were almost there. In a year or two, we'd be able to breathe easier, invest in marketing, maybe hire an assistant. Then, we could relax. She listened, nodded, and then rolled her eyes again. That I began to feel like her view of me was shifting. That it was as if I was no longer the ambitious man she'd seen at the beginning. I had become cheap. Uninteresting. "Small point. One day," she said. "A man without expensive shoes isn't a man. You're 35, and you look like a schoolboy from shop class." I laughed. I thought it was a joke. But it wasn't. That we were still working together, still living in the same house, still eating at the same table. But it felt like there was an invisible glass wall between us. I would talk to her, she'd hear me, but wouldn't really listen. Her responses were cold, or sarcastic, and sometimes, she wouldn't respond at all. Then came the work evenings. She claimed to be meeting with suppliers, discussing prices, logistics, delivery. She'd return late, sometimes with wine on her lips, in a cheerful mood. That I asked, "Who were you with? It's not interesting with you." At least I had a laugh there. A small jab. But I could feel how deeply it cut. That I started doubting myself. Maybe I really had become boring. Maybe I overdid it with the saving, with this, "let's save for the future," mentality. But then something happened that changed everything. One evening, when she went to take a shower, her laptop was left open. I didn't have any real suspicions. I just went over to check the work email since we needed to send a report, and that's when I saw a draft of an email to a lawyer. That it was about her wanting a divorce, and the most interesting part, with a request for the division of assets of the joint business. She detailed the investments, tried to present herself as the primary initiator of the project, the key figure, the one who allegedly carried the whole process. I couldn't believe my eyes that we had built everything together. I took out loans. I worked from morning till night. And she was already planning how she would divide it. Without me. That my chest tightened. I didn't accuse her right away. I just went outside, got in the car, and drove around. For an hour. 2. I tried to compose myself. When I returned, she was already asleep. So calm. So innocent, and inside me, everything was burning. I felt betrayed. Like everything I'd worked for, my business, my relationships, wasn't real, but an illusion. The next day, I didn't say a word, but I began digging. After that night, I no longer saw Helen as my wife. She continued to live right next to me, in the same house, sitting across from me at dinner, laughing on the phone, lying in the same bed. But I knew, she was lying. And I was no longer going to be blind to it that I started observing that first, carefully. I noticed who she was texting, what time she was leaving, how she was dressing. Before, she used to wear comfortable clothes for work, jeans, a t-shirt, hair pulled back. Now, red lipstick, heels, the perfume I gave her for our first wedding anniversary. I asked why she was dressing up for a meeting with a supplier. She answered with a smirk, "Someone has to support the business since you're not spending on it." And that's when I realized, this wasn't just an emotional breakdown. This was a deliberate preparation that I reached out to a college friend who worked in data recovery and IT security. I explained the situation, paid him in advance, and handed over Helen's laptop. 3 days later, he called me, "Bro, are you sure you want to see this?" I nodded. An hour later, I was sitting in my garage, holding a USB drive that seemed to smell like sulfur. On it were the recovered chats, deleted messages, instant messages, and drafts. She had been meeting with Michael, the owner of a competing firm we had been fighting for market share with for the past couple of years. He always raised my suspicions, constantly coming up with partnership offers, trying to poach our clients, and once even accidentally sending our business plan, which somehow ended up in his hands. I had turned a blind eye back then, but that was a mistake. The conversation was like a knife to the heart. He doesn't even suspect it. It's funny how he trusts me, she wrote to Michael. You're a genius, darling. We'll pin him in court, he won't be able to prove anything. When we split everything, we'll start our own thing, without him. He's dragging you down. How's he in bed? Like furniture. I don't remember the last time anything worthwhile happened. I read this, and I felt myself dying inside. All these years, it wasn't just emptiness. She despised me. Mocked me. Betrayed me not just physically, but emotionally. Used me to build the business, and then, discarded me like a worn-out tool. And him, Michael. The guy I had coffee with at one of the conferences, talking about ethical competition. Looking me in the eye, shaking my hand. Then he was screwing my wife and convincing her to take everything I built. That I didn't sleep for 2 days. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling. That I could have left everything right then. Told her, pack your things, we're getting a divorce. But one thought kept me going, if they've planned everything, then I need to break their plan. Not just leave. But make the first move. That's how my counterstrike began. That I gathered the messages, saved everything in 3 places, on a USB drive, in the cloud, and on paper. I went through the bank statements, noticed small but regular transfers from our account to a third party whose name meant nothing to me. Later, I found out, it was a fake marketing company, registered under an old friend of Michael's. Helen had been funneling part of our profits to him through it. That I went to a lawyer. Explained what was going on, showed the evidence. He immediately said, if you want to keep the business, you need to act fast and quietly. And I began the preparation, but the most important thing, I didn't let on. That I kept acting as usual. I made her breakfast, wished her good night, told her that we would get through the tough times. She relaxed. And I waited. A predator, biding my time for the right moment to strike. One night, I woke up because I heard Helen talking in her sleep. He doesn't suspect a thing, everything is going perfectly. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, with a calmness I had never felt before. There was no more love. No more pain. Only the goal, and I knew, my perfect, was coming. That I didn't know what to do with this knowledge. I didn't know how to react, what to say. But when morning came, I realized one thing, if I was going to break this cycle, I needed to act, not just complain or call for help. I had to destroy them. And do it with maximum precision. First, I found a way to pressure Michael. To do this, I couldn't just argue with Helen or throw a tantrum. No. I was going to exploit his weaknesses, and he had many. I remembered everything I knew about Michael. He was the owner of a company, but he constantly violated tax laws. He was involved in shady schemes, hiding income, using shell companies for money laundering. I saw how he always smirked when taxes were mentioned. I knew he was taking risks. But I never thought I'd use this against him. That I approached my lawyer and told him I wanted to start an official war. He immediately understood and recommended involving a financial investigator. Within a few days, we gathered all the data on Michael and his business. All I needed was to find a couple of documented mistakes related to tax evasion. It wasn't difficult. And without hesitation, I sent all this material to the IRS. Now, I just had to wait. That in the meantime, I continued to play the role. Helen didn't notice that I had become calmer, that my conversations with her no longer made me angry, but rather indifferent. We continued to live as usual. I supposedly knew nothing, she supposedly kept hiding her affair, but in reality, I prepared not only a financial blow to Michael. That in my workshop, there was some fairly expensive equipment I had bought a couple of years ago. My lawyer immediately suggested using it as leverage. I filed a report stating that the equipment was stolen. A couple of calls, and within a week, Michael's warehouse had information about his illegal dealings. There was a note about the stolen equipment, with some fake transaction reports allegedly associated with it. That I sat at my desk in the workshop, watching the machines work, listening to the hum of the tools. I realized I was no longer the person I used to be. I had stopped worrying. I had stopped being afraid. Michael received his first blow a week later. When problems started with his business, he reached out to me for help. In his typical, pretentious style, characteristic of people like him, "Eric, bro, we've got a small problem, you understand, we need to cooperate, we've got a shared future." It was all so staged. I listened to his voice, hearing his anxiety. I couldn't help but feel satisfaction. But I kept my calm. "Yes, Michael, of course. We're partners. You know I'm always ready to help." I couldn't let him know that I was already in the process of destroying his business. I simply left him to wallow in his mistakes, letting him sink deeper into his own mess. Meanwhile, I increased the pressure on Helen. Not directly, but her responses became more nervous. She clearly noticed that I wasn't the same as before. Her attempts to manipulate me weren't working. But the most important thing, I started doing everything she feared. I began building a new life for myself. I had plans, goals, and people who were helping me. I became significant to others, even without her. I still hadn't told her directly that I knew she had betrayed me. She continued to feel me slipping away. That I saw her irritation. It was like a smoldering flame that she tried to hide. One night, she came home late and said she needed to talk. I knew she was going to try to justify herself, find words to regain my trust. But I was ready. I sat still, not moving, and just waited. "Eric, you're not like this. I know you've noticed. You don't understand how hard this has been for me, you don't give me any chances." I raised my hand to silence her. "Do you really think I didn't understand? Do you really believe I don't know who you've slept with, what you and Michael talked about? Tell me, Helen, when did you decide that my life was your game?" She looked at me with confusion. But I didn't give her a chance to justify herself. "You've already made your choice. You picked a side. And now you'll pay for it." I wouldn't say I was fully prepared for what happened with Helen. Although, if I'm honest, I wasn't really upset anymore. I was completely consumed by myself, by my goal. I knew she would bring me nothing but destruction. And yet, what happened to her, strange as it may sound, didn't bring me any pleasure. It wasn't a vengeful triumph. It was more like watching a carousel spin faster and faster, and then, at some point, it suddenly stops. And everything around turns to garbage. When Helen realized I wasn't going to forgive her, that her manipulations no longer worked, she changed. She became overly clingy, almost as if trying to salvage something. But I didn't want to see her. With each passing day, she became more desperate. At first, she tried threatening me with a divorce. She tried scaring me, claiming I'd lose the business, that her lawyers had already prepared the documents. But it was all an empty bluff. That's when I made my decision that I didn't just give the business to Helen. I moved away. After I caused Michael serious financial problems, I realized my life no longer had any ties to this place, to this city. I moved to Savannah, rented a small house, and started fresh. Not just because of Helen and Michael, but because I needed this, to feel free again. To experience catharsis and break away from the life I had built in an attempt to please others, that I opened a new business, but this time with a different approach. Less inhibition, more inspiration. I worked with colleagues, with new clients, creating something of my own that didn't depend on old resentments. It was a reboot, not just materially, but mentally. Helen tried to come back. She couldn't just give up. Days, weeks, months passed, and she kept trying to reach me. At one point, she even suggested living for the business, as if everything that had happened could just be forgotten. But, no matter how hard I tried to be restrained, I understood that she no longer had any power over me. That I looked back at my old city. Inside, everything felt empty. The people I once spoke to began to recognize me in my new role. Some called me weak, others called me malicious. But I no longer cared about their opinions. I was busy with something important, myself. As for Helen, she tried to push through the courts to take part of the business. But she didn't know that I had already taken care of everything that could incriminate her. My lawyer filed a counterclaim, which backed up facts about her betrayal, falsifications, and financial manipulations. Everything she tried to do was doomed to fail. She couldn't believe that I knew her plan so well. And, in truth, I knew her much better than she thought. Her whole life, within just a few months, had crumbled. The business we started together ceased to be profitable. And instead of keeping friendly relations with Michael, she was left with nothing. Michael also found himself in a very tough spot, his tax investigation beginning to turn into a criminal case. In the end, he had to go into hiding, and his business was confiscated. Helen tried to regain control, but she ended up completely alone. Those who were loyal to her turned away. Those who helped her lost interest when it became clear that her actions would bring no one any benefit. All her manipulative power, all her confidence, it all disappeared. As for me, I watched from the sidelines. And, honestly, that was the most tormenting part for her. I didn't take part in her downfall. I didn't engage in her suffering. I didn't apologize for what I'd done. I simply kept moving forward. Building a new life, without her and without all the illusions I once believed in. I had survived her betrayal, her manipulations. But the most important thing I realized was this: she couldn't take away what I had built myself. Not because I had something material, but because I now knew I could rebuild it all. Even without her. I never thought I would, at some point in my life, feel like such a loner. Free, but alone with myself. When everything around you falls apart, when you're standing on the ruins of your past, there's nothing left but yourself. I often think back to how all of this began. How I dreamed of a future with Helen. How we built our business, how we hoped for better days when everything would be simpler, when we wouldn't have to spend energy on trivial things. I believed that if we worked together, if we supported each other, we would definitely succeed. But her betrayal severed me from that dream forever. Today, I stand on the other shore. I look back and feel no resentment, but I don't feel gratitude either. All that's left is cold emptiness, like after a heavy storm, when the earth has been cleared of everything unnecessary. And I feel that on this new land, I can rebuild everything from scratch. And without her. Without Michael. Without those people who once seemed important to me. I live in Savannah, in a small house with a view of the river. I like this place. It's quiet, peaceful. Here, I don't have to hide. Here, I don't have to justify myself. I've started working on a new project, a small business that now brings me joy. It's not the huge business I had with Helen, but it's my own. I'm in my place. Of course, it was hard at first. After everything I went through, it was hard to trust people. But I learned. I learned to believe in myself. And most importantly, I learned not to let anyone else determine my happiness. I realized that, despite all the pain, despite the betrayal, I could move forward. I learned to love myself and take care of myself, and it's not selfishness, it's a necessity. Helen tried to reach out to me a few more times. She wrote me letters, tried to find a way to meet. In one of them, she said she understood everything now, that she wanted to get back everything she lost. But I knew that wasn't for me. I didn't reply. My decisions had long been made. I wasn't ready to go back to what was once mine. That was in the past. Michael disappeared from my life when he was arrested. His business was shut down, and all his assets were frozen. I thought that would be sweet revenge, but I didn't feel satisfaction. I wasn't celebrating his fall. I just knew he got what he deserved. And that was important, but I didn't want to dwell on it anymore. It all stayed outside of my new world that I remember the moment I realized I didn't need to live in the past. That freedom isn't just about getting rid of the people who betrayed you, but learning to let go. It was a tough lesson for me. A lesson that gave me more than I could have expected. I didn't just free myself from Helen and Michael, I freed myself from the old version of me, from the illusions about how life should be arranged. Now, when I look back at everything that happened, I understand there was no truth, no justice, no revenge. There were only redefined values and a rewritten life. I don't think about what could have been if I stayed with Helen, if we continued working together. It doesn't matter. What matters is that I learned to walk my own path, to be free, and not to fear being lonely, that I feel alive again. Sometimes I even laugh when I think about how once I was so attached to these people, how I feared loneliness. Today, I understand that loneliness is not the enemy. It's my ally. I'm no longer afraid to be alone. I'm no longer afraid to be myself. Maybe one day I'll meet someone with whom I can trust again. But for now, I'm content to be here, in this house, in this city. I'm content with the fact that I've rediscovered myself. Freedom isn't just the absence of chains. It's the realization that you are not dependent on the opinions of others. And I am free.